Making the left wall is very similar to making the back wall. In the cutting guide, under left wall, we have 2 long strips for the tops and bases and 4 shorter strips for the sides. And then under the black chipboard, we again have 2 pieces for the backs and the fronts. So we're going to start out by doing a little sizing, and I've just cut a strip of white cardstock here that's 1.5 inches by 8.5 inches, and I'm making sure I've got it butted up tight against this back corner tower and then tight against the wall here. And then I'll bring in my front corner tower and make sure I have it positioned correctly so that it's right up against this edge wherever I had it before, and I'm holding it down tight, and then I'm making sure I'm using a really thin pencil to trace that outline of that tower there. And then I can remove this and we can do a little measuring. Now the first measurement we want to do is on the back edge, and for me that back edge is 7 3/16. And then I'm going to draw a line that is 7/8 of an inch in front of that back line, and that represents the front of our wall, and I'm going to measure that. And for me, that's again 7 3/16. So I know that I can just use a 7 3/16 inch rectangle to work with for the length of my wall. So I'm going to cut one of my strips. These were cut 7.5 to start with, just to allow us a little extra. I'm going to cut one strip to 7 3/16, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw a center line using my centering ruler. So I've drawn my center line and aligned it with a line on my craft mat. This is just the same as we did when we worked on the back wall, sorry. And then I'm taking my 1.5 inch circle template, lining up the vertical lines on that template on that same grid line on my craft mat, and I'm holding it back to leave a 1/16 of an inch space in between the edge of this chipboard and the circle template. And once I have that, I'm going to lightly draw those 2 arcs. Then I'll take a couple pieces of my chipboard. I'll put one vertically behind the piece that we're working on, and then I'll take another one and butt it up right against that and remove the first one. And this will give us a 1/16 of an inch space here that we can use to align our little center wall tower. So we want to put the tower horizontally between the front tick marks of front ends of the arcs we just drew, and here in the back we will align it with the back edge of that 1/16 inch channel. And once you've checked that placement, go ahead and make a darker line on both sides of the tower, and those darker lines will be our cutting lines for our pieces of the top and eventually the base. So before I cut them, I'm going to write left top on this side and right top on that side. And now I'm going to cut the arcs on those darker lines that I just drew. So here are my cutout shapes. I've discarded the piece in the middle, we don't need that. And I'm going to take my other piece that we cut for the top and base, and I will trace these and cut exact replicas of both the right side and the left side, and then I will mark them left base inside and right base inside. Now I want to use these top pieces, the pieces we first cut, to measure the length that we want to use for our final widths for our fronts and backs. So I'll start with the left side here, and I'm measuring that front, and it's just a hair more than 2 7/8, not quite to 15/16. So I'm just going to write 2 7/8 plus, and I know what that means. And then on my right top, we'll see, sometimes these aren't exactly the same, and that one is still about the same, 2 7/8 plus. And then for the back, and I'll make, so both of these are the same. So on the back of the left, I have 3 5/16. And on the right side, that looks more like 3 1/4. So I'm going to make sure that I have these marked now, so they say right back and left back. It's not very much of a difference, but since there is a difference, I just want to keep track of it. So now I've done that, and I can cut these 4 pieces to side in a minute. But before I do that, there's one other thing we want to do on the right sides of this, and that is to take our tower, and we don't want to cut off the corners, but we just want to make a slight little curve there so that these pieces will fit better around the end of this tower. And I would say this is coming in about 1/16 of an inch or so. And remember, don't cut off any of the length when you cut this. Make sure you have a good sharp blade in your craft knife, and go ahead and do that on the right sides, on these 2 right sides. I have my pieces all cut to length, and I'm going to use my torn notebook die just like I did for the back wall. So I've prepped my front walls with the brown and black kind of checked pattern. Again, it's 7/8 of an inch long. And then on the backs, I have prepped them with, again, 7/8 inch tall paper. This is the red checked from the 6-inch pad. And if you're not using black chipboard, you'll want to, on the front, on the back of the front panels, put a piece of black cardstock that's 7/8 of an inch tall. And on the back of the 2 back pieces, again put black cardstock, but make that strip 1 1/4 inch tall. And that will, I'll give you a finished side facing into the inside of the project. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my panels. I'll again use some low-tack tape and align them with this top edge of the die here and get it centered how I like it. So I'll cut my fort panels, and then I'll be back. So here are the pieces cut with the die. I've also inked the edges with my black marker to hide the white, and if you're using craft chipboard, you'll need to color those as well. And then I also used a little distress ink on the edges. And just like with the back wall, I cut a piece, this is just black cardstock. I added a piece of the red trim, 7/8 inch, and I cut this out on the die machine, and then I just trimmed off so that I only have one of the little thingies, and it's in the center here. Just from experience with cutting the back wall, I knew that's how it would work. So now let's put together our back wall. I want to work from the back, and since I have a left and a right that are slightly different, I want to make sure I keep them in that orientation. So I'll flip these over so that... So I'm just going to use a couple little pieces of low-tack tape here just to hold these in place. I've put them on my craft mat here so that this edge over here is at 3/16, and I'll put this one in place over here as well. And then I'm just going to take the piece of cardstock and basically center it on that with the red facing the opposite direction. And then I'll just take a chalk pencil and make an outline on either side of that so that I know where to put some score tape down. So I'm going to lay down some score tape, and then I'll burnish this piece of cardstock in place. And then once we have this piece together, I'm going to turn it on its side thusly, and I'm going to measure up for the ledger strip just like we did for the back, and it comes in at 2 13/16. That's a 1/16 more than 3/4. So I've just got it lined up here on my craft mat on the left side, and then I can measure over my 13/16 from this mark on my, or this line on my mat. Once I get that correct, I'll go ahead and draw a pencil line across there. Now, just like we did for the back wall, I've used some of the black pattern paper that has this kind of a design on it from the 6x6 pad, and covered the two top pieces. It's directional, so I made sure to keep them facing the outside here. And now we're ready to start putting our wall together. We're going to start with some ledger strips, and I've cut 6 that are 2.5 inches long, and I'm going to start by putting in a strip on each of the outsides, and I'll hold it back from the bottom about 1/8 of an inch, and then of course from the sides it's 1/16 of an inch, and I'm just using one of my little pieces that I haven't installed yet as a spacer. So I'll put a matching one on this other side. And now that I have the two on the sides installed, I'll take another strip, and I'm just going to butt it up against this piece that we put in on the side, and of course hold it back 1/16 of an inch from the bottom. And then on the top, we'll use this line that we drew to line up the top of our ledger strip, and again we'll bump it against the ledger strip that's on the side. And I'll add those other two pieces on this side as well. So now we can assemble our little 3/4 inch pieces. I'm going to start with the left base, and we wrote inside on there so that we know that that piece goes to the inside like so. And I'm going to run a bead of glue right along that edge. And I'll install this piece flush with that left edge, flush with this edge over here. And then I'll run a bead of glue along the outside here and take one of our side pieces. I'll also put a little glue on that bottom edge. That should be flush with this outside edge right here. Then I'll take another side wall and put a bead of glue on the bottom of it and on one of its sides here. And for placement of this one, I'm just going to butt it up against the ends of that ledger strip. Now it probably won't come as far as this corner. That's fine. We definitely don't want it to go past that corner, but with the measurements we shouldn't have that issue. So that side can set up. And on the right side, I'll put the right base inside on, and then I'll adjust the cutting guide. We only need 3 pieces of wall because we won't put a wall on this edge over here. And I'll run a bead of glue along here. And again, this one gets installed right there along the edges of those strips. Now if it wants to creep over this point here, just let it come in at a little bit of a slant so that it won't pass that point down there at the bottom. And we'll let those set up. Now once our glue is set up on our little walls there, we can come in and put a bead of glue along the top of those ledger strips. And then make sure you get the left side on the left. Line up this outside edge flush with the edge of the back panel there and this side panel. And then on the right side, we'll again run some glue along the top of the ledger strip and this side wall. And here, when we put this piece in, remember it has this little curved thing. This end that we were careful not to cut off, that end should match up with the end of our wall. And again, this is kind of a close fit here, so make sure that the side wall is not encroaching on our curve. Just bend it back a little bit if you need to. And I'll put this assembly aside to dry. While our structure is drying, we can finish adding pattern paper to our front wall pieces. You can see I've prepped them here with some score tape, and I'm again using this checked paper, and I'm just going to butt it up exactly against that the bottom of that top trim there, and cut that off. I'm again going to use some trim along this part of the wall. This time I'm using a strip that says Once Upon a Time. I've cut the red paper from the 6x6 pad, and again it's just slightly under 3/8, but 3/8 would work as well. And then to put it in place, I'll measure 5/8 inch down from the top and hold my ruler there, and then I can bring my strip in and align it right with the edge of that ruler. And I'll repeat that for the other side. And our structure should be dry by now, so I'll go ahead and install these pieces I'm going to keep them flush with the right side, and they should meet up with our points here in the middle as well. So I'll do that just by running a bead of glue around the edges here. And then once our walls are set up, we can put in our center wall tower. I've run a big bead of glue down the center here. I think I'll widen that just a little bit. And then I'll take and use my fine line gluer and put some glue on these side edges. And we can put a little bit on the inside edges here as well. Now we can pull this apart a little bit. I think you can see I've got it at an angle here. And when this tower goes in, pay attention to where the bottom is. It should be flush with the bottom. It should seat all the way in the back of the wall unit, and your windows should be aligned in the center. So make sure that's popped all the way to the back there, and then it's flush with the bottom, and then let that set up and dry for a few minutes. So once our wall unit is dried, we can do a little test fit up here. Make sure it's tight against your right column there, and this should fit right to the edge of the notch here. See if I can move it down here. It's fitting right to the edge of that notch, so then our tower should fit in nicely. I can't see very well because I have this on an angle, so hopefully you can see that it's fitting. I can feel that it's fitting right here in the front and over here at the side as well. Now before we glue it in, let's mark for some doors on our towers, just kind of like we did before on this back tower, where we can take a pencil and draw where that door goes. And then it may be a little bit harder to see on this tower, and when you put this tower, the front round tower, there's a larger division between, there's 2 windows on one side and 2 on the other, and there's a larger division here. Remember, that's opposite that seam. That seam should fit right into the center of this cutout piece, and also look to see if the division through that window there should be kind of pointing out from on that diagonal as well, so that you'll see 2 windows when you look from this side and 2 windows when you look from the front. So I'll go ahead and put my doors in, and I made my doors just like I did before by cutting off the little bottom piece of a 1-inch window. Now I have my doors attached. I think you might be able to barely make out this one on the right tower over here. I'm going to go ahead and glue my wall into place, and I'll do that by putting glue on this portion of the wall here, or the interior structure I should say, and then on the left end of our wall. And make sure when you put it in place that you hold it tight up against this this back corner tower. And you can also run a bead of glue along the underside there as well. And then once the wall is set up, I'm going to put in this one corner tower. I'll run some glue. I'll check to see exactly where things are going to match. On mine, my front wall here does not perfectly match to the tower, so there's no use in putting any glue right there. But I'll put glue on this top part, on these internal parts over here, and then of course I'll put glue on the bottom of the tower. And I'll hold that with some good pressure until it's dry. Now we're going to work on the right wall, and in the cutting guide there's pieces up here on the any color medium weight chipboard for the top, the base, and the sides, and then underneath the black there's only one listing because the back and the front are the same size for this particular wall. So we're going to start out by doing some sizing here, and I've cut a strip of white cardstock that is 7/8 inch wide by 6 inches long. The length doesn't really matter so much as long as it's longer than about 4.5 inches or so, but the width you want to have is 7/8 of an inch. So we're going to just put this in place here, make sure it butts up against the tall tower. And then I'm going to bring in my front corner tower and put it in place. And I'm watching to see, it's off camera, but I have the same distance here on this edge, which is 1/2 inch, as I have on my other corner tower that's back there. And so once I know that I've got that spacing and I've got this right up against the wall, I'll take a thin pencil and go ahead and draw that curve. And I'll also put an arrow so that I know it's facing back to that way. Now that I have that curve drawn, I'll take my craft knife and cut out directly on that curve. So now that I've cut the curve, I want to cut this piece down to 3/4 of an inch. Remember, it's 7/8 of an inch now. But to do that, I want to remove 1/16 of an inch from each of these long sides. So I'll start by putting my ruler at 13/16 and trimming 1/16 off that back side. And then I can flip it around and cut it at 3/4. So now that we've cut this strip to 3/4 inch wide, we can use it in a couple of ways. First, it can be a template to cut the top and the base pieces to the right length and with the proper curve on here. So I'll just trace around that curve for each one and cut that. And I'll also make sure that I put the arrow on each one so that I get these pieces oriented correctly. And then the other thing that we can do is use this piece to measure to see what are the exact lengths that we need to have our front and back pieces. So I'm measuring at the back, and on mine, my back measures 4 1/16. So I'll just write that on my back. And then I'll also check my front because it could be different. But it's also 4 1/16. So I'll just write this so I don't forget. So I'm going to cut my front and back to the proper length. I'll cut my top and base here with the curves, and I'll probably do some preliminary work with paper, etc. So I cut my pieces to the right length that we just measured, and I also have skipped ahead a couple steps because we've done this so many times before. On the back I put a 7/8 inch strip of red, and on the front I put a 7/8 inch strip of the brown check. And then remember, if you're using craft chipboard, you'd have to put a 7/8 inch strip of black cardstock on the back of the front piece and a 1 1/4 inch strip of black cardstock on the back piece before you cut them with the die. And then I also have gone ahead and finished the front of the front piece and adding this little trim here, which you recall gets put on at 5/8 of an inch below the top edge. And this is that same red that's just a little bit less than 3/8, and then a leftover piece of the trim. I used the Once Upon a Time words there. So we can put that front piece aside for a moment, and then for our back, before we construct this, we need to put a line on here for our ledger strip, and that comes in at 2 13/16, and that is a 1/16 more than 3/4 of an inch. So I'll just line up my ruler and draw that line. And then I've gone ahead and cut some of our ledger strips. The ones that I'm going to use on the side are 2.5 inches, and the ones that I will use on the top and bottom are 3 1/4 inches. So 2.5 and 3 1/4. I'll start by working on the right side and putting in a side piece here. I'm keeping it 1/8 of an inch up from the bottom and a 1/16 of an inch in from this edge. I'll just use one of the little side pieces to get that correct. And once I have that on, I'll take one of my 3.5 inch pieces and I'll butt it up right against the piece we just installed and hold it back a 1/16 of an inch from that bottom edge. And then I'll take this other 3 1/4 inch piece and butt it up against this piece on the side and have it even with the with the line we drew at the top. And then after I have this one installed on the top, I'll take this last one and butt it up against those two that we just installed, and it's ending up a little bit more than 1/4 inch from that end. We want to hold it back from that side because remember there's a curved wall there, so we don't want to come right to that edge. So there are the ledger strips installed, and now we can put on, this is my chipboard base. I already, the curved edges go towards the left. I already used some of that same paper to cover the top piece. I'll just put that up here for a moment. And then I'll just use some wet glue to first install the bottom and then the sides. So then after the bottom and the two sides have set up for a moment, I can put my top piece on. And I'll make sure that I keep this right side flush with the end there. We'll let that set up for a few minutes. And now that the assembly has set up, I've run a bead of glue around all those edges and I can install my front piece. And we'll let that set up for a few minutes before we install it on the project. So I'm ready to do a little dry fit here. And there's my wall up against the tall tower. And then I'll bring in my tower. And everything is looking good. And I think you can see I've cut a couple little doors here, but I've figured out that it's probably just as easy to do it by eye and put them in afterwards. So that's what I think I'll do. So I'm not going to attach the tower now. This tower is going to stay unattached until we work on the front wall. But I'm going to go ahead and install this right wall, and I will do it like we've done the other walls by putting some glue here and here, and then on the side that gets attached to the tall tower, and also some on the bottom. And then I'll just hold that with some pressure in place, tied up against that tall tower for a few minutes until that sets up. So here's the right wall installed. And like I said, I'm going to wait to install this front corner tower until after we work on the front wall.